Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. We start with the biggest weather feature here impacting the United States right now, and that will be Hurricane Laura. This was a sun-up to about midday animation here from GOES 16, and if we take a closer look at the latest data we have, watch this animation right here. This shows us that this particular system is intensifying very rapidly as it makes landfall. In fact, earlier this morning when I began preparing for the long-range outlook, the wind speeds were 110 miles an hour, and then as I started to record here midday, they were already up to 140 miles an hour. So the pressure dropping rapidly and the winds responding here. It is a bit unnerving to see such a symmetric storm intensifying so quickly as it approaches the border here of Texas and Louisiana. And in the upper levels, we see that anticyclonic or that clockwise outflow, which indicates that the storm is, for lack of a better term, breathing very well into the upper levels of the atmosphere, which means no wind shear here to disrupt this one like we saw with Marco. So before we get into this longer range forecast, let's at least take a look at the latest update we have from the National Hurricane Center. As you can see here, 140 mile an hour sustained wind, and it will be making landfall late tonight, and you can see in red where the hurricane warnings are located. We will likely extend hurricane force winds, that being over 74 miles an hour, as far north as Shreveport before they do calm down below that 74 mile an hour threshold before crossing into Arkansas. But as you notice, the path of the system takes it through basically southern Missouri, southern Illinois, over into Tennessee and Kentucky. That will be where the heavy rains from this system eventually make it through. Now, before we get there, let's take a look at the storm surge from the National Hurricane Center here. Generally, we're seeing storm surge that can range anywhere between 6 and 20 feet, all depending on where the particular system makes landfall. Remember that for the track of any tropical cyclone, it is always on the right-hand side of the hurricane where we have the greatest storm surge. Bays and inlets also focus that storm surge, and depending on whether or not this hits with respect to tidal information, so high tide versus low tide, will impact the storm surge. Well, National Hurricane Center puts all that together, and some of the numbers that you see here are going to be quite high. So this is going to be a massive flooding event right here along the coast. Now, to look at the wind speeds, this is tricky, okay? So from the National Digital Forecast Database, the strongest wind that they're recording here as it makes landfall is about 138 miles an hour, keeping this right at that Category 4 strength. But these data and these numbers continue to get updated here, and this only takes us through the fastest winds we expect to see through Friday afternoon is what you're looking at here. I do want to show you this, but I want to make sure that we see the next map in context. The European model is probably the most aggressive, and if we just look out all the way through the end of this weekend into early next week, this is kind of a wind gust swath. Now, gusts, we're talking about gusts. Right now, the European model is allowing Laura to intensify such that the gusts may be approaching 180 to maybe up to 200 miles an hour just offshore. Now remember, when the northern edge of a tropical cyclone hits land, it automatically begins the weakening process when it hits land like the size of the United States here. And also notice how windy things will be getting here in the high plains, in the north central plains with the next front that will be arriving. I'll show you that in just a few moments. I do think, based on history, that the European model has got the wind speeds way too high in through this area. I think they're going to not be this strong. And as I told you a few moments ago, I expect hurricane force winds to reach Shreveport, but as we get into Arkansas, I don't anticipate these winds being this fast. Seeing 50 to maybe up to 70 mile an hour gusts is certainly in the cards, but seeing them up here towards 100, I don't think so at this point. I think the system will weaken pretty quickly as it gets on land. Now, what about precipitation? Well, the National Digital Forecast Database through Saturday morning has this painted here for us. So the potential between 2 and upwards of 8+ inches of rainfall in through this corridor is certainly a possibility here. And we can look at it again from the operational European model here. And we see that same narrow corridor showing up with the very, very heavy rainfall. Again, that's more on the right-hand side of the center of circulation of Laura as it moves toward toward the north. You can see getting into Arkansas, Missouri, over into Tennessee, Kentucky, amounts may range between 2 and maybe upwards of 5 inches depending on exactly where those rain bands set up. The GFS model, just for some completeness here, it is got a broader swath of heavier rains, but not nearly the magnitude as both the National Digital Forecast Database and the European. So we've got multiple sources here to look at. And yes, we will be talking about what's coming here out of the Dakotas, really South Dakota into Minnesota, Wisconsin, just in a few moments as well. So last thing I want to show you about precipitation is all the way through Monday night, this is the probability of getting at least 4 inches of rain. So you can see that this rain will be very ill-timed in parts of Arkansas with what we're doing with rice this time of year, and also with the harvesting here of corn and soybeans. And that extends, of course, down into Louisiana and eastern Texas. And we got to think about cotton down there, corn, soybeans, and like I said, in parts of Arkansas, rice. So this is certainly a major impact on agriculture. Okay, leading up to this, the last 7 days, remember we've been focusing on that big ridge that's been kind of closed off over the west. Storms kind of cascading down the high plains and coming out of the Dakotas into Minnesota, Wisconsin. In fact, earlier this week, some big hail here in Wisconsin. But you can almost see this wedge where we've missed out on the rainfall, and we've seen the very heavy rain in parts of the southeast. Well, remember, here is where we're expecting Laura to go. So we're going to be putting down some extremely heavy rain in a place that has been quite dry as of late. Okay, let's step away from Laura for a moment and just look at broader picture things here. This map shows you over the last 30 days precipitation compared to normal. You can even see some of the heavier rains out in California that we've seen with some of the moisture that's come up like this. We can see pockets here in parts of the Mid-South getting over to the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, and of course up the eastern part of the U.S. here where it's been extremely wet. But there's a large corridor right in through here that has been dry, same right over here in Pennsylvania and that part of Ohio. And if we start to look at that particular region, I want to show you that from August 1st to the 26th, what we've got in terms of precipitation ranks. So this goes all the way back 128 years, so that's back to 1893. And we can see that in those corridors we just discussed, we have some pockets in there in those climate districts that are very, very dry. And when we think about what needs to happen here very soon to get some rainfall to help any of the crop, we have to remember that a lot of this crop is finished, the corn and soybeans there. Well, soybeans are finishing, but a lot of the corn has already passed 2,500 GDUs in parts of Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. So therefore, the precip at this point isn't necessarily going to really enhance grain fill. We may have already seen the damage come from that. The second part of this is when we see the precipitation coming through in the coming days, unfortunately, it's going to come back over in the terms of those strong to severe storms. So a little bit more analysis on this. I went out and I created a time series here for the dates of August 1st through the 24th. And the area that I'm doing this analysis over is bounded by this box, okay? Right there. So this is the region that I'm talking about. So northern Illinois, straight to the west, including part of southern Wisconsin. So that's the area. So in that box, I then added up the rainfall from the Precip data set from August 1st through the 24th. And 2020 currently sits right here. Now to show you what those ranks look like, 2020 is currently sitting as the 5th driest, but notice how close it is in precipitation amounts to 92, 83, 2003, and then 84 is the outlier there with below an inch on average in that area. So just a couple requests about this time period. A lot of folks are wanting to correlate yield to this. We do have to be very careful because this same region also got hit with that derecho, which is going to make it challenging to correlate the yields. But I went back and looked over July up to this point in August right in through here. And right now for Iowa, that time period, July 1 to August 24th, only 83, 12, and 13 were drier for Iowa. What I'm trying to do here is to put a point on some of the reports we're getting out of Iowa showing how dry things are and the impact it's had. Well, the data are backing that up. So I just want to make that clear to folks as they're watching this particular video. Okay, as we work our way through the next 3 days, our severe storm index, which is on the bottom, and the Storm Prediction Center, which is on the top, are highlighting the same regions each of the next 3 days for the strong to severe storms. As we work our way into Saturday, which will be day 3, a lot of what you see here will likely be backed up into southern Iowa and into northern Missouri. And I think the storms as they come through the northern part of Illinois are going to be more scattered. So unfortunately, if we do get rain in some of those drier areas that I just highlighted here, it may come in with some strong straight line winds. It may come in with some hail, and some of these storms may even have the potential to rotate depending on wind shear. So looking just at the next week from the European model, let's do a quick multi-model analysis. You can see the corridors over which we're anticipating the heaviest rains. Okay, I kind of highlighted them there. We do notice that in the European model, this particular area is forecast to be near average to below average in terms of precipitation. It is not that we won't have storms in there, it's just they're going to be highly scattered in their nature. At least that's the thinking at this point as we work through this weekend and into early next week. Now the GFS is a bit more aggressive with this, can you tell? A lot wetter in through all of these areas, and one of the big reasons for that is due to the way it is sweeping through a broader trough. Now let me show you what I'm talking about. Fast forward right now just to next Tuesday afternoon. The GFS looks like this. The European looks like that. And this is a remarkable difference here when comparing these two models for the same time frame. You see, the European cuts off this trough here. Where did it come from? Alaska. So while the main wave ran out ahead through the Canadian prairies, a piece of that trough in the European model goes right here over like Nevada. The GFS keeps it all together and sweeps this broader trough through, and that is why we saw a much wider sector showing up with more precipitation. Now, I got to be honest, the GFS has done a better job a lot this summer with picking up on this convection. But the big story here may not just be precipitation. It may also have to do a lot with temperatures. We're going to talk about that in a few moments. Now, let's go from Tuesday of next week to next Thursday. You see, the European dragging that wave that's to the south, it's not going to pull that out in here into the Central Plains until we get to the end of next week. And I'll tell you, if the European is right, this wave coming through here could really set up this section of the country for very active severe weather. The GFS keeps things more to the north, and while it does have a bit of weak troughing in there, this is still going to be a pattern where we're going to keep things coming out of Canada, not necessarily coming out of the Four Corners, okay? From there, I want to show you how things align by day 10. So this is what's amazing. Switching over to the ensembles, they both agree on this feature. Little different amplitude, but they both see it. They also have this ridge that's going here along the west coast of North America into the Gulf of Alaska. But once again, go all the way out to day 15, and the patterns begin to just diverge a little bit. You see, the GFS wants to do this, and the European's got a bit flatter pattern. Can you see the difference? Now, where this difference is going to show up is more in terms of temperatures than maybe in precipitation initially. Why I'm saying that is, this is what the current week 2 outlook looks like from the GFS on the left and the European on the right. You see, with those waves sweeping through, they're painting a corridor in between those lines I drew there of active, thunderstorm production. Now remember, to be wetter than normal in September is not the same as being wetter than normal in July or June, for example. And also, right here along the Gulf Coast, while I do anticipate to see scattered storms, it's just that time of year, neither model into week 2 is picking up on any tropical systems developing. And we know that September 10th is the peak in the hurricane season, so that's going to be a wild card as we move forward into this particular time period. So I'd say along the Gulf Coast is the greatest uncertainty. Now let's talk temperatures before we go longer term. It's another scorcher in the midsection of the country today on Wednesday, and as we play this through to Thursday, you can see the effect of the cloud cover from Laura right here. But watch as we go from Thursday into Friday. Here comes our first frontal boundary in through the northern plains. You saw the severe weather that was out ahead of it. And then as we go from there into Saturday, that's the broader cool down for a broad section of the country here, while the west remains slightly warmer than average. Texas, by the way, you're not cooling down at all over the next, foreseeable future that I can see. Here's Sunday into Monday. Here's our next shot at cooler air. That's that big trough I showed you. By Monday into Tuesday, that one is sweeping through the northern plains of the United States and really knocking temperatures back here into, in places, upper 60s, lower 70s at this point. Now, where are we going from there? Let's switch on over to the latest updates we have from the GFS ensemble and the European. You can see, remember that both were by day 10 bringing in the same trough. So that's the cooler weather we see there, warm along the Gulf Coast, along the south, and along the western coast of the United States. Let's go now out to days 10 through 15. 12Z GFS, which just came in as I was recording this, finally came into better alignment on the temperature patterns than it had been in the past. And you can see here now that both models are favoring more warmth west, with cooler weather stretching from the Canadian prairies through the center of the United States right over to the Midwest, okay? So that's now what we're seeing looking out at week 2. From there, let's look at week 3 and week 4, and I'm going to be honest, we're going to have to be very careful looking at the maps on the left. These are the precipitation maps. At this particular point, the variability run to run on the precipitation anomalies has been so high, we shouldn't trust them. But what's been interesting is that the models won't let go of this pattern of keeping cooler weather on the eastern side of the Rockies, allowing warmth to build up the west coast. Also, more than likely building along the Gulf Coast of the United States too, and maybe up the East Coast. Now, when I look at this, what I see here is possibly the model being persistent, which means whatever it's got in it right now, it wants to keep cooking that, keep that going, not change away from it, which is building that warmth back west and allowing the cooler weather to slide in the mid part of the United States. So what we have to do is do a bit of model comparison and then put some more meteorology into this. The same time periods, the European is now picking up on a similar pattern. You see the warmth west, the cooler weather in through this area. Now this is not cold, it's cooler. And even getting out into that September 15th to the 21st time period, it's trying to keep this area near average with more warmth west and warmth here and possibly spreading it up the East Coast. The ECMWF has had a very well-established warm bias for a while now this summer. So that's why I'm going to continue to call it into question. But what I don't know is if the models are really just hanging on to persistence or have they found a real signal. Let's try to answer that together. One of our biggest drivers going into the end of the summer and this fall has been this, our La Nina. Now, you know that I've struggled really understanding the interaction, I think, between the MJO and the La Nina this year. In fact, 2 videos ago, I was saying, wow, it looks like the MJO is going to cut into those cooler temperatures there. It didn't do that at all. In fact, it has let the ocean temperatures here go back down below that critical threshold of minus 0.5 Celsius. So now we've got a stronger La Nina in this area, and over the next 15 days, you see the blues in through here? That indicates stronger trade winds in this area. So this means our La Nina has got a little bit of oomph to it right now. And the Southern Oscillation Index is positive, reflecting this, okay? So what does all that mean? Well, if we look at the month of September, and we say, what's the correlation with the Southern Oscillation Index and temperatures? Well, it's going to be inverse to what you see here. And what that means is when the Southern Oscillation Index is positive, like it is right now, okay, it tends to have an inverse relationship with the temperatures on this map, which means that this area tends to be warm. Now, if we're going to warm that area up, okay, that would mean that we would get more ridging west and possibly cooler weather coming into the central part of the United States. So maybe that makes some sense. But what about some other pieces to this? You remember the MJO getting stuck over here in phase 1 and 2? It's not doing that now. It did that back in June and July, but now it seems to be moving out of phase 1 and 2, but maybe heading back over toward null phase. In other words, not really cranking out and coming around like this. Now, what does all that really mean? Well, the MJO is going to help us understand where the atmosphere is going to gain and lose momentum. And remember when it got stuck, we lost all that momentum right in through here. Lately, because of where the MJO has been and where it's going, we've lost some momentum here in the tropics. But this whole time, if you just look up here between 30 north and 60 north, we've kept stronger winds. So the global wind anomalies, which dropped here and are right now dropping again, are not necessarily coming from a reduction in the wind speed in the jet stream, but more about the behavior of the tropics. Now, when I see this, remember that July, we saw cooler weather intruding in the center part of the United States with only brief interludes of heat in the Corn Belt toward the Great Lakes states. Where was the heat? It was northeast, it was across the Gulf Coast, and it was in the western United States. Okay, so from there, let me take you to my next conclusion here. If I look out all the way to the end of the model runs, one thing I see here is that the Pacific jet coming off of Asia coming here into the Aleutian Islands, and then running in this direction, continues to stay, well, strong. We're not seeing it fade. We're not seeing it block. We're not even really seeing it split anywhere. And that would lead toward maybe a bit more troughing here as we go into the month of September. And that would say, stay away from the long duration high heat. The GFS sees a very similar thing, although it is trying to do a bit more of a split along the west coast. But either way, that would be bringing in more troughing into this area. So for the month of September, I can start to buy into the forecast by the CFSV2 and the European for week 3 saying, hey, we might be closer to average rather than hot as we get into the month of September, maybe even slightly cooler than normal. So as I finish up this video, I ask myself these questions. What needs to happen to that jet stream in September and October for it to be warm in the Midwest? Because that's the area that we were kind of concentrating on here. And to be honest with you, if we can pull out what the Midwest is going to be, we'll know what the East is going to be and what the West is going to be. So September, what I did was I made a list of all of the warmest Septembers. And this is the key feature here. That upstream ridge just there over the Aleutian Islands. You see, that tends to produce a highly amplified pattern that tends to give us a lot of warmth right in through this area. Okay? Right now, we're not seeing that. You just saw it a moment ago. We were seeing a bit more troughing in this area, which led to ridging along the west coast, keeping it warm there, and much more seasonable weather right here in this part of the United States. October. Now, when you look at La Nina, typically La Nina ocean temperatures give us warmer Octobers. Now, that's not the case for winter, but for October. And once again, we see this trough here in the Gulf of Alaska and a ridge over the Great Lakes. So you need to be watching in the forecast coming up for September and October. 2 areas. One is going to be here, the Aleutian Islands, and 2, I think, is going to be over the Great Lakes. That tends to be the most important thing for figuring October and September's temperatures. From there, let's now talk about wet, because we've been very concerned about another wet harvest. So if September's going to be wet, look at this. Ridge here, Aleutian Islands to Gulf of Alaska, trough that comes into the west, and the jet stream just screams over a ridge in the southeast. That is what we had in 2019. That's what made 19 such a difficult harvest after such a horrible growing season for a lot of us with rain. As we get into October, though, we've got to watch out for more troughing here in the northwest part of the United States and north central United States, and again, ridging over the northeast. What again this does is it pulls in lots of tropical moisture here and potentially gives us better chances for being wetter than normal. So these are the things we're going to have to watch develop carefully. Right now, I do not see any indication that the models are going over to these high amplitude patterns for the month of September and October in a fashion that's going to make us overly wet. The wild card will be tropical systems and what this La Nina is doing. I'm going to watch it carefully. We're going to keep a better eye on that 2-week time period, but keep kind of looking out here into the week 3 and week 4 to see if we can make better sense of this, okay? All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Keep a close eye on Laura for me, and I hope for those of you that are in the path of Laura that you have already taken evacuation procedures and that if you're sticking around, you're being safe, okay? Thank you so much.